Hey, there we are. Hello, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us again today. I'm Doug Denny, Director of Technical Marketing for the Dedicated Infrastructure Business Unit at Rackspace. And again, I've got a couple of subject matter experts with me here today to talk about dedicated single tenant solutions and that we designed to help meet a customer's requirements for security and performance. Um, Let me get started by first introducing the guests we have today. We've got Chris Heinen, Manager of Solution Architecture. Say hello, Chris.
Hi there, everybody. Nice to join you
Yeah.
today.
And real quick, tell the viewers what a manager of solution architecture does here, real quick.
Sure. So, myself and my team design solutions for customers on Rackspace platforms that take into account all their various business requirements and technical requirements and make sure that the solutions integrate appropriately with the offerings we have.
Very cool. Thanks for joining us today. And we also have Shantu Roy, who is the CTO of our VMware practice area here at Rackspace. Say hi, Shantu.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, Doug.
Hey, and give us a bit of insight into the work you do for the VMware practice area.
So I'm pretty much the chief technologist for the VMware practice area. Our focus is on the solutions that we bring to our customers here at Rackspace, mainly virtualization and private cloud sort of initiatives that our customers are trying to solve for.
Okay, very cool. So again, Alan Bush and crew have a really great deep dive series they host that discusses all things cloud. But we continue to get a lot of response from customers and viewers about the dedicated side of our business and what role dedicated single tenant infrastructure has to play in this new world of cloud, right? And we spun up this deep dive session to talk about just that. And the topics range, week over week. We host a session the second, third, and fourth Wednesday of every month. And again, each week we'll focus on a different solution area, and each month we'll have a different theme, such as security, compliance, performance, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, Today we're talking specifically about how a customer's requirements drove us to make decisions, architectural decisions that led to a design that incorporated our Rackspace managed virtualization platform and dedicated compute hosts. And we'll talk about why we didn't select a multi-tenant cloud solution, what the advantages were of a dedicated plus virtualized architecture were for the customer as it pertains to their security goals, and just talk in general about our VMware portfolio here at Rackspace. Quick disclaimer, if you're watching this right now and you work in like network security or some sort of OPSEC field, I don't know if this is going to go as deep as you might like, but in general, what we are talking about is how customer security requirements for a workload drove architectural decisions. I just want to make that distinction. We are next week on the 27th, when we get into storage, going to take the conversation to that deeper level. So you may want to show up next week if you're really looking for something that granular. But again, we're very much focused on the architecture that we designed based on customer security requirements. Um, Along the way, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature uh, of the Google Hangout to submit them if you're a live viewer. If you are watching us on demand, or if you are a live viewer and think of a question later that you still want to get to us, you can reach us at customercare@rackspace.com, and that email alias goes to me and my team, and we'll get back to you promptly if you send anything our way. So, Chris, I'm going to focus on you for a minute here. I want to talk about the customer and their use case. I know we can't name the customer, right? And we have redacted any information in the architecture that might identify them. But as much as you can divulge, tell me a bit about what type of customer this was, what business they were in, and why they came to Rackspace, what they brought to us.
Sure. So this is a customer with both a brick and mortar store footprint as well as a significant e-commerce business, and they came to us basically in the process of doing a reboot of their e-commerce storefront, next generation of that platform. And what they're looking for us to help them solve for in terms of problems is operating and providing infrastructure on a platform that would be both stable and secure, for that e-commerce storefront, the full cash register elements. And then over the course of the discussion, we also uncovered the needs and the integration points for some of their back-end warehousing integration points to allow for actual warehouse management, inventory management, and integration with the rest of their systems of record. So, from a high level, we went through an assessment phase with them, discovering what the objectives they wanted to accomplish as part of this e-commerce store reboot. We got introduced to and also talked to the developers that they brought in to actually do a lot of the development of that next generation storefront, and really triangulated the full set and built out a full set of requirements for what that infrastructure would need to do, what sort of features it would have to have, and also what kind of platform made the most sense for them for stability and also for resiliency.
Okay, awesome. And what options are on the table? Did they divulge any of the different types of solutions they were looking for, or did they just come to us and say, "Help me"?
Yeah, I think they came with a desire to be a lot more dynamic. I think in their previous versions of their e-commerce store that they'd done sort of build to maximum peak models, and they were looking for something that was as flexible as they could get. Now, they were aware that some of their e-commerce software had some elasticity limitations around the actual e-commerce software licensing. And so there were finite amounts with which they could scale, but they were looking to control costs and ensure that the platform, as much as possible, was variable in terms of capacity to meet some of their seasonal demand. They did have definite on-season and off-season purchasing behaviors from their customer, which correlated to the load they were expecting on those systems.
Okay,
so,
very cool. And is the application that was running on this infrastructure, was that something they wrote themselves, or was this a known application that you can buy from a vendor?
Yeah, no, this was very definitely a known commercial, fairly common e-commerce application that they were looking to use here, and it did in turn come with some customization components. So they definitely did have some integration points that they were making use of to do both, real-time chat ops with some of their customers on the website. It also had some integration pieces that they were developed around search, where they were doing some catalog-oriented things to export their catalogs a little more dynamically than the off-the-shelf behavior of the application.
Okay.
And so some of the requirements, just to sort of go over the spectrum of some of those, it was everything from the web front end to sort of the store processing system to even some specific requirements around the back-end database. In this case, we required Oracle Rack clustering, both for the availability and the horsepower capability for scaling.
Okay. Got it. And so the decision not to use a multi-tenant public cloud, by our team, obviously, but perhaps the customer as well. It sounds like there are multiple factors there. Oracle Rack being one contributing factor, licensing, right? And it sounds like there's some security components which we'll dive into in a bit that also kind of led us down that path, right?
Yeah, they also had some of those integration points. The key systems there were not. They did have single points of failure inside the environment, and that there was a single server with a single role, and it wasn't easily able to be clustered.
Okay.
And I think some of that conversation there drove us towards, rather than a multi-tenant public cloud, they required the predictable performance. They required the resiliency that something like a VMware HA can provide there, to have at least a first-line HA rather than doing a full DR site failover for them. And they also did have DR requirements in terms of being able to replicate to a passive secondary site.
Okay.
For failover. And so all those considerations really drove us more towards a VMware-based virtualization platform rather than a more public cloud-oriented platform.
Okay, great, thanks. And so we spent some time talking about the requirements that the customer divulged to us early in the design process. I'm going to flip to the architecture here now and just take a look at what we've got going on. Just walk me through this a bit, just at the high level, right? We've got a lot of things on this slide, and kind of call out the key elements so we can level set with the audience as to what it is they're looking at.
Sure. So what we're providing here, top of the diagram is sort of the network and security stack components. So we've got basically firewall components in there. We're performing IDS functionality using the Alert Logic Threat Manager platform, and also doing web application firewall to help meet customers' compliance requirements. Being an e-commerce site, even though they, in this particular customer's case, were using a payment processor, they wanted to keep their options open for future, PCI considerations in terms of being able to pass a full PCI out. So one of the things that they wanted us to do was engineer in some of the functional roles that are required for PCI, such as web application firewall function. So we included that as part of the topology for the Rackspace provided services. Also included the load balancer for functional behaviors around that. And then the section across the bottom of the diagram there basically highlights out the specific VMware footprint. So that's a dedicated hypervisor cluster exclusive to that customer. So that gives them the control and predictable performance, right? They don't have any kind of noisy neighbor effect that they have to be concerned about during their peak shopping seasons. We've got basically a 5-node hypervisor cluster there, and then a number of VMs running, providing the storefront functions, both of search as well as web and some of their other add-on components. A more secure middle layer, network segment there, doing a lot of their systems of record, warehouse integration, some other enterprise services coming in at that layer. And then the customer also brought to us a number of security requirements. And this customer, being both a brick and mortar and an online retailer, had existing brick and mortar sites that they needed to protect as well. And they had their own information security group. And through the conversations with that information security group, they had a strong desire to not lose control and lose visibility of the larger picture of how their entire enterprise's security was going. And they had some established standards around how they actually ingested security events. And while they were definitely very interested in the expertise Rackspace brings on e-com, they didn't want to necessarily lose visibility of this. So it was sort of a trust but verify behavior. So they were looking to also receive copies of all the alerts and events that we were getting filtered in through their SIEM. So they wanted to take, and SIEM being security information and event management. So they had an existing platform for that, and one of the things that they asked us was if we could integrate that into our footprint and be able to send them all that security data for their own, purposes for review.
Okay.
So that's kind of what's going on in that security operations management section right there.
Okay.
We brought in a customer-provided appliance there, so that's the customer's direct SIEM. It matches all the standards that they're using in the rest of their enterprise, and we're able to integrate that into the fabric and send out all the traffic that they actually needed to ingest to get it onto their pane of glass as well as ours.
Great. And I notice, again, this is a logical diagram, right? So, but what I do see called out here is, again, isolated network segments. Actually, it looks like as many as 4 represented here.
Yeah, 4 here, and some customers, not this particular one, but many customers have even more segments. So it's not uncommon for us to have fairly granular slicing in terms of network segmentation. It does allow for a greater degree of control. In this particular customer's case, this was the topology that they felt they needed. And this is all something that we work out with the customer and go through with their security stakeholders and discuss exactly what topology needs to be defined to meet their information security requirements, as well as provide our own 2 cents on what we've seen other customers make use of in general.
Okay.
Also, a segment called out here, not part of the VMware footprint, but obviously a database cluster footprint. They wanted that isolated on its own network segment because that's where their most critical systems of record are, and that's making use of some encryption being provided by an encryption appliance also that we can provide via Rackspace or the customer can provide as part of that model.
And that's the VMware metric HSM I see there called out. Okay.
Yep, for metric encryption appliance there. And that can be depending on FIPS requirements. We can do that in both virtual and physical form factors. In the case of this particular customer, they felt that the virtual was adequate.
Okay. Okay, very cool. Thanks for walking us through. We're gonna move into some discussions about VMware virtualization at Rackspace, and that gives a good foundation for that discussion. Real quick, so you can consume VMware in a variety of ways from Rackspace. This particular customer architecture is developed on top of our Rackspace server virtualization offering, which is one of a handful of ways that we carve up and deliver managed VMware vSphere or vCloud to customers today. So, Shantu, can you walk us through what the landscape of VMware-based solutions that customers can pull from today?
Sure, absolutely. So, before we dive into the specifics of the solutions, I think one thing to note with Chris's diagram is as we come up with these offerings, the whole idea here is to be able to get out of our customers' way and really enhance them, whether they're looking to either start their journey to the cloud or even starting the whole process of virtualization. The offerings that we have kind of allows them to take a journey from a beginning to end that we help them through. So that's a kind of a key thing to remember, because we have customers as this that are pretty advanced in their consumption of virtualization, but we have also customers on the other end that are just starting their journey. So to that, we have three main offerings at Rackspace. The first one is server virtualization, is what you see here, and just a couple details on that. So that is a very fully white glove sort of a treatment of your hypervisors, your VMs. You get a fully managed VM. What we define as managed is a VM that has backup, antivirus, patching, all that into it, as well as the ability for rackers to log into those VMs themselves, which gives great tactical advantage for IT teams that are looking to expand and scale, but not give up, some kind of control. So through, rackers at this point can join or connect to those VMs and help, troubleshoot if there's any issues. And then this level of support goes all the way up the stack into the hypervisors themselves, the surrounding infrastructure as a whole, as well as the storage. So server, if you want to look at it in a kind of a simpler term, it's a very white glove treatment of virtualization. This allows IT departments to really offload onto us. We become an extension for them, where they can offload onto us the day-to-day operations and kind of focus on their applications, if you will. And then, for other customers that have already invested into vCenter or have already invested into vCloud Director, we have two offerings. One is a dedicated vCenter. Another one is a dedicated vCloud Director. And those effectively can add and act as extensions to their existing infrastructures, whether it's in their DCs or other provider DCs. And those essentially, Rackspace gives the support and management, if you will, all the way up to the virtualization layer. So the VMs themselves, we don't get into the support there, but we do it all the way up to that layer. So the hypervisors, the storage, the network, the security devices, all that stuff we can bring layered support on, but we cannot really try to stay out of your way. So if you are a very mature user of and have a big investment into vCenter from VMware, then this would be a great extension for you to come and consume it from Rackspace as a whole.
Okay, that makes sense. And some questions then. So server virtualization is a hands-off experience for the customer as it pertains to managing the vSphere platform, right? So they're not logging in with the VMware infrastructure client. They're not in there fiddling with like CPU overcommitment ratios, all that kind of stuff, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a great point. So the levels of access that you get in each of these three platforms, server virtualization, effectively, you just become consumers of the VM. Okay. Rackspace takes the onus and ownership of the hypervisor, so doing any kind of a capacity planning, all that information we're consistently and readily always monitoring and have constant conversations with you as our customers to tell you, hey, here's where you are with capacity, here's where things are, looking and trending, and even anything from break fix and what have you. So your consumption at this point becomes just the VM itself. In the dedicated vCenter and vCloud, you have the ability to actually truly be making an extension of your current VMware environment, which means you have access to the hypervisors, you have access to be able to go in and really turn the levers on what you need from a virtualization configuration perspective, if you will. So again, here in server virtualization for another specific customer, we really kind of alleviate a lot of the pain points of the feeding and care of their infrastructure and their VMs.
Okay, so like for this customer, right? There was a benefit for them to delivering this on a platform that gave them features like HA and DRS and vMotion, but they didn't necessarily want to have to go in there and set policy for vMotion and DRS, right?
Exactly.
This is an application group, right? Okay.
Yeah. So we've been doing. I mean, just a point of kind of note is we've been doing VMware solutions for over 10 years, and so what you get out of server virtualization is the ability to leverage those 10 plus years worth of battlefront managing and maintaining and seeing just about every. I'm gonna limb out here to say that it's just about every rendition of these scenarios, and I think Chris can speak to that as well, that we've seen it. So we know a tremendous amount about what it takes to keep these infrastructures up and going, and the whole idea here is to let you focus on what you do, like the application stack. Everything else we'll handle. To your point, whether it's the DRS settings, whether it is being able to make sure the backups are happening, making sure that things are running within capacity, and you have enough capacity so that if you do burst, you have some room there to accommodate. All those things are things that we kind of this goes back to the whole pet and cattle discussions that took place a few years ago. This is very much a pet rendition, if you will.
That makes sense. And I often oversimplify. Like if I'm at a conference or something, right, and someone asks me, why would I pick this platform versus the other? I think, if the person I'm talking to, if their job is they work in like central IT for a large organization, it's very likely that they're going to be more interested to talk about things like dedicated vCenter as a product from Rackspace or dedicated vCloud, because the reality is they have this whole ocean of infrastructure that they already manage in their data centers, and if they buy an infrastructure endpoint from Rackspace, they don't want to change everything that they do just because Rackspace is opinionated in the way we deliver vCenter. They want us to manage the underlying bits, but if they use VR ops in a certain way, they want to continue using VR ops the same way with the infrastructure here at Rackspace. If they have standard operating procedures for provisioning images in their own data centers, they don't want to have to change that for the handful of hosts they host at Rackspace. So they want the control, right? On the spectrum, on a continuum from management to control, IT orgs generally fall more toward the control part of the spectrum.
Yeah. And
right?
They have an investment, and they already have a way of doing things, and they already have an ecosystem of their own, if you will. So the idea here is to be able to add to that and not be to your point, we have an opinion of how we want to do things and have them accommodate our opinion. It should be flipped the other way around. So that's where those other two platforms really make sense.
Yeah.
Plus, and all the tools and investment. If the existing IT org is very DevOps centric and has built a custom tooling or has bought other tools, off-the-shelf tools that are available, this allows them to plug those into the Rackspace environments and have them become an entity that is part of everything that they manage, versus having to say, oh, we do everything from here to here, but when it comes to the Rackspace stuff, we have to do things differently. So that's what we're trying to heavily steer away from, and helping our customers really enhance the use of virtualization, not let the the difference in how we implement it become a factor for them. So this is where having the ability to join the worlds of dedicated and virtualized environments is so unique and very effective, because here we're not trying to shove everything into one scenario. This gives the customer the ability to design what fits best for them.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm going to take a quick pause to remind any live viewers that if you have questions, again, feel free to submit them anytime to the Q&A tool in the Hangout. And towards the end of the show, we're going to take some time out to address any of the questions. But fling them out now if you got them. To come back then to this customer where we selected server virtualization as opposed to dedicated vCenter or dedicated vCloud offerings from Rackspace, this customer was focused on delivering an application, right? This was not necessarily your typical IT buyer who is tasked with delivering infrastructure. We actually had an e-com application, and this team was focused on the functionality of the app, right? So help me out, Chris, then. When you were making a call, looking at our own platform choices that you could have picked, again, highlight why ServerVirt made the most sense for the customer's use case.
Sure. So, and this customer did have some resources that were definitely fairly sophisticated VMware consumers, but the staff of that was not. They weren't 24/7, and they had requirements for as much support as its cash register on an e-commerce site. It's open all day, every day, all the time, and they really needed to supplement the capability to respond 24/7 to incidents and issues. They'd had things crash from time to time, and response time with a more limited staff can impact some of that. So to prevent that kind of risk from approaching here, they did see, even their existing VMware team saw a lot of value in having us take care of the underlying virtualization bits. And the other big driver for it was the additional management of the operating system, right? Rackspace has robust metrics around how we actually manage operating systems day in, day out, monitoring, response, all that kind of stuff. So not just the virtual infrastructure was critical, but the actual operating system infrastructure that rode on top of it was also super critical to their e-commerce functionality. So they saw a lot of value in having us manage all the way through to the OS, and in some cases actually take on some DBA management. That was also another feature of some of the overall footprint. So that really drove them to, they didn't necessarily want to dictate as much about how the operating systems were deployed and instantiated, because this was such a standalone footprint. And so they were interested in having us take on that operating system management, which comes with server virtualization, so antivirus, and it adds to that security story. Is they wanted to make sure that we Rackspace were ensuring that we were deploying our hardened operating systems that we have as part of our stock catalog, and ensuring that we were integrating things such as log management services that we were offering to this customer in with each of the individual operating systems.
Okay.
So I think that the combination of those factors really made server virtualization the best platform. It gives them that high availability on a VM basis for some of the VMs which aren't quite resilient in the cloud, pure public cloud ready format for some of those applications, especially a lot of the back-end ERP systems. The managed operating system was extremely valuable to this customer. To get that 24/7 capability to respond to operating system incidents, and the governance and diligence of more methodological approach to things like patches and updates and those things that come with that operating system management.
Okay, great. And Shantu, let me get your take on this. So we only do VMware one way at Rackspace across all of our offerings, and that is dedicated. Right? Everything from the storage all the way up through the edge networking, right? And explain how, I think it's worth calling that out because that is a little bit different. I think that it has benefits to customers that have heavier security requirements over the typical vCloud offering. So can you kind of explain what that means?
Sure, no, absolutely, and that's a great point. I think that's what also differentiates us, to your point, from the rest of the industry, in the sense that with the concept of having dedicated hypervisors, beyond just the data, the transient data, the persistent data, how it sits and where it lives, all that aside, what a dedicated hypervisor cluster lets you do is it lets our customers bring to us certain scenarios which wouldn't necessarily fit into the one size fits all. And there's not that there's a big issue with the public cloud, it's just that there you're forced to accommodate or forced to consume what's available. Here there's a degree of customization. Now, I take this as, and I go back to saying, I think a server virtualization, offering is much like the Uber, if you will, is where you're focused on just arriving from point A to point B versus driving yourself or renting a car. So this is kind of where it falls into. So you're the point that Chris made earlier, I think, is very valid. My intent wasn't to say that you're not necessarily mature from a virtualization consumption perspective, but this is more on the feeding and care of this infrastructure, right, and the VMs. Is that if this is going to become a cumbersome add-on to you, this is where we can really come and help. Because not only do we know how to do this well, we also can, kind of partner with you and help you do what you do better. So this is why we've kind of decided to head from the firewall south to staying dedicated, is that it gives us the ability to come and offer the VMware offerings in a very siloed private cloud fashion. And no, I mean, we've been doing this for over 10 years, which gives us kind of the inception of any cloudy features that we've brought with the vCloud Director and what have you, lets you really, come experience this in a very contained fashion. Like I said, we've got compliance requirements that can be met, data requirements that can be met, design requirements that can be met with these three offerings that are needed. So we have customers that do, e-commerce like what Chris is talking about. We have customers that are also many service providers themselves. There's central IT that comes to us because of the way we have gone about offering these solutions. So they're about I would say about a 70 to 80% configure, leaving you a little room on the top to configure to fit your needs.
Great. And when compared to the alternative, which is rolling your own in a colo or doing it in another data center, even though this isn't quite as, even though we can't manipulate and tweak these configurations quite as quickly as you can in the public cloud, still we can move pretty fast, right? Compared to doing it yourself, where you own the actual server. Just real quick, if a customer deployed with us and 3 months later their needs changed and we needed to add capacity, generally what's the experience like?
So all of our customers here have, and I think Chris can speak to this a bit deeper as well, is that they have a team that effectively are account managers that follow not only their current use, and they keep track of tickets, they keep track of the health of your footprint at Rackspace, if I were to put it in generic terms here. So what happens there is that, first of all, we're aware of what's happening, so as you're growing in your pace of growth, we can match. Whether that is much quicker to add add-ons, and knowing our or each of the account managers having visibility into our supply chain, we can let you know that, hey, we need to add a whole new array, and we can do that ahead of time, knowing how long it's going to take. So that way we try to minimize the impact for you as a customer and not really get in the way of your growth. And Chris, I mean, you've seen a variety of different customer sizes that fit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things just specifically around, for example, this particular footprint, I mentioned a little bit the customer had some seasonal purchasing spikes, as well as the general continued growth of e-commerce for them. So there were a couple of things that we have in here that are pre-built to accommodate some of that. So our VMware basically model allows for some utility billing. So they did have some workloads and some capacity that they spun up only during their peak season, and then they spun down. And the product allows for that granular control over individual VMs, being able to turn them on, turn them off via our portal. The other thing we have in here, one of the things that anytime you launch a brand new greenfield application, one of the things you really don't understand is how's that data footprint going to grow, especially if it's dependent on customer behavior patterns. So we made use of our utility shared XAMPP products so that we're able to actually allocate additional storage in very incremental slices to them. So one of the things that we had to actually kind of coach the customer through, having come from a more traditional buy it and build it architecture, is to forecast for slightly tighter time frames and then add capacity as you go. So you don't have to sort of say, what's our e-com going to be in 3 years and buy for that. You can design to a much nearer term midpoint and then be able to scale with Rackspace as you go, both on this platform and on some of the other components. Yeah, so,
I was going to say, I mean, one even in addition to that, I think from a financial perspective, the whole CapEx or CapEx OpEx discussion is very, very relevant, especially in high growth customers that we have. I mean, for them to be able to consume, but keep it in a very OpEx fashion is also, and I've heard that to be something that's highly desired.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think if a customer's coming more traditional colo model, they're used to these 3-year tech refresh budget cycles. But on workloads like this, where it's extremely hard to predict what you're going to need 2 years out, because you don't know what you've done your forecast for what uptake is supposed to going to be on the storefront. But yeah, those are best forecasts, and it does tend to be a little bit of a shot in the dark, even for the best data-driven companies. I think being able to come in an operational expenditure model, especially with somebody as flexible as Rackspace in terms of both the products and how we handle growth with customers. Customers in this case were able to plan for a fairly near term what they knew because they were coming from existing e-storefront, and just sort of have some vaguer, okay, here's plan A when we hit this capacity mark, here's plan B when we hit this capacity mark. So we had sort of pre-built step functions that we talked out, but it was significantly better than this customer sort of saying, okay, where do we need to be in 3 years? Okay, let's buy for that. Because A, they didn't really know where they were going to be in 3 years precisely. So, and the risk of being wrong on that was that they'd have to do mid-capital cycle expenditures, which were extremely difficult for this customer. So there was a lot of advantage in being able to sort of grow as you go.
Yeah, and we're not punitive to our customers if there's stuff to decrease, right? So we all know the predictability of markets and finances are there's still a little bit of a black art to it. But yeah, so as customers come to us, I think when we use the term partnering with our customers, I think we genuinely mean partnering. Like we have very little punitive stuff that really gets in the way of our customers, and we're here to kind of help them. And whether you're small or large, I think there's a fit.
Yeah, hey, we talked about this briefly in the last hangout, but the idea of the concept of the cost of being wrong, right? And I think anyone who's worked in a cloud service provider or integrator over the last 5 years has seen a lot of examples of where a customer wanted the economic benefits of the cloud so badly that they placed workloads in the cloud that were not designed for it because they like this flexibility, and they suffered. In a lot of cases, are willing to tolerate the technical downsides of making that decision in exchange for the economic benefits. And but you really don't have to make that compromise, because another possibility exists, which is dedicated infrastructure consumed in the service provider model. So you pick the right architectural platform, you get near similar economic benefits in terms of pay for use. It's not quite measured in minutes or hours, it's measured in months, but you still don't have that. It still doesn't sting as much as like buying the wrong size SAN, right? And putting it in your data center. So I think we'll probably talk about that a lot over the course of the series, frankly. I want to push on a little bit into just the server virtualization, speaking about the Rackspace platform, server user experience. Because again, we mentioned that this is not something that a customer manages through the VMware infrastructure client. They're managed, it's instead entirely managed by Rackspace. So if I'm a Rackspace customer and I need to, say, create a new VM on my dedicated infrastructure, what are my avenues for getting that done? How does that work?
Great question. So the interactions with the Rackspace team as a whole, so just a little peek behind the curtain, if you will. There's a whole 67-man team today that are engineers that are focused purely on the VMware offering. Okay. And then we have partners in the security teams, we have partners in the storage teams. So altogether, aggregate, I'd say you have the leveraged capacity of thousands of rackers that are available to you with deep expertise in each of these arenas. So when you call in for so there's multiple ways you can either call in, get a hold of your account manager, use the portal, to open a Create Me a VM ticket. And in this Create Me a VM, you can specify additional other software that might get added. In this case, for example, this customer has a separate DBA in the rack cluster, but there are others that have decided to go virtualized. And so if there's any help they need from our critical application services team, for them to get them engaged to help with either DBA schema, deployment, whatever might be the case, all that can be done during that time. And what we do is at that point that this this create me a VM ticket ends up into our queue. It gets picked up by our virtualization engineers who work in coordination with our OS team to be able to build the VM and deploy it, and then make that back available to you guys. And we use our backend ticketing system as a way to notify. And the nice part about this is that, from a compliance perspective and stuff like that, we have everything that's tracked inside the ticketing system, so that when a VM gets created, all the details and items that went into it, which typically in a lot of other offerings with some of our competitors, that's not an option that's available for you. So that's a big plus that I found out inadvertently when a customer mentioned that to me. It's like, hey, I love the fact that I can go in and ask for details about everything that was created in my environment, as if it was something that's being done local on-site. So it's something we assumed, but it clearly is a benefit. So anyway, so that's kind of how the process goes. And once this VM comes online, it gets registered to the backup infrastructure, it gets registered to the monitoring infrastructure, and it becomes another node on the things that we monitor for this specific customer. So if it goes down, if there's ping loss to it, if there's any issues with the VM, it falls into one of those other things that we manage for our customers.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. I think that's helpful, right? Especially to someone who has used VMware in their data center and is trying to figure out, okay, well, what does it mean if Rackspace operates this for me, right? That's that opens up a whole host of questions, such as, by the way, like you called out the fact that there was like 60-odd engineers, right, that are focused solely on VMware, which I think is a great point to note. We don't just have like Joe and he has VCP3, right?
Yeah.
There's 60 plus of them.
Yeah, and there's maybe just to take a second on talking about our partnership with VMware itself.
Okay.
I know we are their biggest service provider. We have to date, I believe, a neighborhood of 68, almost approaching on 69,000 managed VMs that we have across our infrastructure. I think that's a little important to note. Plus, what we do is, being their biggest service provider, we partner with VMware not only on helping kind of help define some of the product strategies in general, but the levels of support and the levels of access that we get into Palo Alto engineering is very unique to us. So as you come and consume, you're really getting just about the next one step removed from VMware's GIS support on the VMware platform as a whole. So, and this Joe Racker, that's working inside the VMware team, if you will, it also has the tribal knowledge of 10 plus years of building this, right? We have a ton of internal knowledge bases, wikis, and what have you that and part of our processes and procedures that we have has evolved as our customer complexity has evolved and the number of customers have evolved. We're I think at 13,000 hypervisors altogether that we're managing every day. So that requires a different purview, a different mindset, different set of tooling to be able to go do that.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think it's an interesting thing you bring up too, because I know as one of the largest ones, there's a lot of actual things that we discover for our upstream vendors, like bugs and stuff. Oftentimes, it's us that finds them because we're aggregating literally thousands of customer use cases for the software. They just happen to flow in and have us operate it on their behalf, and that's great in a sense too. The relationships we have with those upstream vendors are significant, often strategic alliances, and that means if you're an SMD, you often through proxy with us have a voice with the upstream vendor that you might not otherwise have if you were buying this on your own.
Yeah, and even the scenario of standing on shoulders of giants is definitely very applicable here. But also the other part that I kid with some of the vendors that we've talked to is, those marketing numbers, the top level, we'll most probably touch them or hit them. So let's make sure that what we're offering can actually sustain that levels of load, because with stuff at scale that we do, we always end up in some fashion hitting those thresholds, and those are important to know, I think, as to what happens and how the product is going to evolve as a result for that, and not be encumbered by it if you're doing it yourself.
Fair points. Well, thanks. I'm going to move into summaries and key takeaways since we're about 15 till the hour. Again, I'll remind anyone watching the show live, please do submit your questions to the tool, and in about 5 minutes or less, we're going to respond to a few of the questions that we have before we close. So thinking through the discussion today, again, it seems to me that one of the big things that I took away was the customizability that we have, of course, in our dedicated platforms in general, but in our managed virtualization platform as well, was a key factor in selecting that platform for the architecture we put in front of the customer. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, customizability in terms of both being able to cut to fit, right, versus a public cloud where the size you have is the size you have in terms of individual VM and resource allocation, and also custom fit in terms of the network and security topology, very important to this customer.
Okay, very cool. And I think looking at things like the database requirements, Oracle RAC specifically, obviously there's a to be made for database technologies on bare metal. Even though the virtualization story with a lot of databases, it gets better by the quarter, right? Still, we chose to place it on bare metal. I want to revisit that real quick. Did the customer come to the table with like IAPS requirements or requests per second metrics that led us on that path, or was it just a best practice that we adopted and put in front of them in the design? How did we arrive on bare metal for Oracle?
Yeah, so some of it came from their e-commerce vendors' recommendation, right? So they'd had established and baked out methods for doing this, and I think we did briefly consider virtualization, but that would have been a little more leading edge. I think we'll continue to see additional virtualization adoption there, but given the scale that they thought they might potentially grow to, they were most comfortable with the physical architecture. It's the most proven topology for this particular use case, I think.
Okay, great. And again, on key takeaways around flexibility too, I think if you let's try to wedge this into the public cloud. But if all those reasons for bare metal selection for the Oracle RAC workload hold true, you don't really have a lot of options to marry virtual or multi-tenant cloud infrastructure with dedicated infrastructure side by side. You've got a lot of like WAN solutions, right? Like direct connect solutions and whatnot that exist, but that doesn't get you that low latency, side by side in the same rack type of architecture that you can get with what we presented on the screen today.
And there were some network considerations as well around the security topology. They were looking at being able to, for their security group, be able to span some network sessions to be able to watch the traffic that they had coming in, and that's simply something that's not technologically possible in public cloud solutions today. Right. So that's something that really drove us more towards the customization and flexibility we have with our VMware offering.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any final thoughts from you guys, Chris or Shantu? Anything you want to call out from today?
No, just one. I think we have an offering that I think has enough customization capability to fit most workloads. So I think we would very much welcome any future conversations around it.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you guys for your time today. I really appreciate you guys coming and hanging out with us. I've got a couple questions in the Q&A chat, just a handful. So I'm gonna read these out. Okay, one of the questions is like, in what situations would you not want to virtualize? Like when would virtualization just not be something that you would do when proposing something to a customer?
So what I've run into with customers is there's some cases, much like Oracle, where it's an architecture that's traditionally been deployed on dedicated physical hardware, and the customer, I think virtualization adoption does continue to progress, but it is, an ever-reducing set of workloads, and some of which do still need to live on dedicated hardware. There's also still certain size and scale considerations, right? When you get up into the extremely high IOPS or extremely high core accounts, where you're starting to look at something close to a single tenant VM, it's consuming an entire hypervisor by itself. There are still some benefits to virtualizing in terms of making use of some of the your orchestration and provisioning, but when you have a large behemoth system like that, mixed in with a lot of smaller workloads, it can make a more complicated DRS and HA scenario for your VMware topology there. And so that's another case where we look at the cost-benefit analysis, and sometimes dedicated solutions actually a little better. Sometimes customers are bringing very specific workloads that have very specific operating system requirements or direct hardware access requirements, and in some cases those need to be provisioned in a slightly different way. Some examples I've had of some of those are extremely high performance databases that are making use of like a solid state PCIe device even faster than something like an SSD drive. And those are something that's still probably best fit function to physical hardware. Also, other specific hardware elements that need to be added, such as like a GPU compute cluster or something making use of GPU resources. That's another fit case where dedicated physical hardware is a much better fit than virtualization.
Okay. Yeah, and I think Chris hit all the spots. The only other one, and maybe you mentioned this, Chris, and I missed it, but licensing sometimes can be a big traumatic ouch factor because there are certain vendors, companies that their licensing is actually very punitive when it's virtualized. So that's another factor that usually steers one way or another. So the other part I think is also having an analog view of a digital solution is kind of the way I like to put it, which means it's not one way or no way, right? It's not everything public cloud or nothing, or everything virtualized or nothing. In my opinion, is that most of these solutions need a mix, the right mix of certain components in order for it to be resilient, scalable, and truly stand the test of time. So that's whenever I talk to people, so my advice is look at all aspects, because there's usually a play in for where dedicated fits into the solution as much as there's virtualization, public cloud, hybrid, whatever might be the case, to truly come up with an end-to-end sort of a portfolio.
Awesome, thanks. I've got another question here regarding the networking and the architecture here. So I'm paraphrasing, but the network segmentation, the logical networks here, what was that handled by? Was that like vShield Edge handling like virtual networking, or was that are these like physical layer 2 network segments handled by the firewall itself depicted in the diagram? How do we achieve that?
Yeah, so we're actually handling these by at either the firewall layer or at the AFM module on the F5 there. So these are separate discrete VLAN segments. And that's actually as per the customer's requirements. Okay,
that makes sense, and that's a good point to note too. That like network, when you provision a VM on the server platform, not only are you provisioning a virtual machine, but you also have a bunch of network plumbing that needs to get hooked up so that VM can speak to the world, right? And there's different approaches to that, obviously, but in our model with ServerVert, that's actually happening. Part of that is automation and process in our provider level network control plane. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. And it's it lends to the central administration of network segmentation and separation here, versus doing it in pure software. Some of the requirements, I think, in terms of packet count and behavior of the topology wouldn't have worked as well with the software-defined segmentation as it does with hardware-defined.
Okay, that makes sense. And again, I think about things like you mentioned spamming, port mirroring, right? That kind of functionality needed for inspection of traffic by like the IDS and Purple WAF, all those things. That's you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? And so that's what drives a lot of the physical networking design in the ServerVert platform.
Yeah, especially when it's hardware, right? That makes it extremely hard to tap a port on a vSwitch. But it does also give the flexibility for the times there's a need to do stuff inside what we internally call the Vbubble. That gives a little bit more, especially not so much on the server platform, but like on the vCloud and vCenter. Sure. If there's some specific like needs from a networking perspective, there is a little bit of malleability inside those environments that allows for customization when it comes to that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, right, so if I were to compare and contrast, server virtualization is heavily plugged into the Rackspace the broader Rackspace provisioning machine, right?
Yes.
It benefits from a lot of the systems that we use to provision all non-public cloud machines.
Yes.
Whereas ServerVert is entirely, or sorry, dedicated vCenter, dedicated vCloud are entirely decoupled from that, and that gives you some flexibility if you want custom software-defined networking solutions as a one-off sort of deal, right?
Correct, and if you want to bring your own appliances on images, I mean, it allows for how you intend to kind of consume the offering. Is it something where, kind of like taking the Uber model back into play, it's like, do you want to just show up at an airport and be driven to your destination, or show up, go from destination A to B with no care or worry about just get from A to B? Or are you in the point of where you really care how you get there and everything else, where it's better for you to drive it? So, yeah, so that's what it boils down to, is the closer that we're integrated and plumbed into the generic Rackspace as a provisioning machine, the more you kind of, let us kind of help with that provisioning and that deployment and what have you. But if you're needing to do that on your own, you can definitely do it in the other two platforms. So again, yeah, this becomes I think I just came up with the Uber analogy like 20 minutes ago. I think it aligns well with that, so I'm going to use it more often.
Okay. I've got one last quick question before I jump to closing comments. The question is, there's an IPsec tunnel currently used to connect the site to like management at the customer site, depicted in the diagram. If a customer wanted to do something like a dedicated MPLS circuit, is that available to them as an option in lieu of IPsec or SSL VPN over the internet?
Yeah, that's an extremely common configuration as well, and it's not uncommon that we wind up with a customer that has both for a need to integrate a lot of different locations. But yeah, we easily can add dedicated MPLS segments. Customer brings their own MPLS network, so it's not like they need to additionally contract for an MPLS network with us. They just bring in their carrier that comes in right there to the firewall, and then they're able to access the entire environment that way. They could even make scenarios where they have pure backend systems that actually don't route directly to the internet or blocked from the internet and just send all their traffic direct over their MPLS segment.
Okay, so that's like the data center extension use case where
exactly
logically it looks like it lives in your data center from a network perspective. Okay, very cool. Awesome. I'm going to jump to closing comments here. So we should be displaying here on the screen in a moment the links that relate to this episode. I encourage everyone who watched this either live or on demand to go to rackspace.com/deepdive, where you can look at the schedule for future sessions. You can download the actual reference architecture that we discussed today if you wanted to take a closer look at it, inspect it, or even potentially edit it, right, for a future conversation with us. Please email any questions you may have to customercare@rackspace.com. And again, that will actually get delivered to me and my team. It won't just go into a queue somewhere. And finally, if you did enjoy this, share it with the social media buttons or comment. Let us know how we did, right? If there's something that we did well, let us know. If you have any constructive feedback you want to give us to help improve the quality of the show, also please do let us know. Won't hurt our feelings. But well, thanks so much to our guests who joined us today for taking time out of your day and talking to us, and thanks so much to the viewers. Have a good one. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Shantu. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.